It is a true pleasure to welcome Dr. Alexandrea Ravenelle. Dr. Ravenelle is an associate professor in sociology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And she's done a ton of really important research illuminating the lives of workers in the gig economy. And her work has done such an important job of debunking this idea that the gig economy, the on-demand economy, is going to solve all the problems of the modern labor market. And her work is very rich, and it weaves together qualitative data, has important policy implications, and shines really much needed light on how modern labor markets are transforming under new technologies, shifting risk, and shifting definitions of work itself. Her first book was Hustle and Gig, Struggling and Surviving in the Sharing Economy, published in 2019 with University of California Press. She followed up that work with a second book, Side Hustle Safety Net, How Vulnerable Workers Survive Precarious Times, which was published in 2023 and focused on the turbulence of the COVID period for workers. She's working on yet another book, Trapped, Gig Workers, Hidden Grip on the Gig Works, Hidden Grip on the American Worker. And today she's going to talk with us about how art mimics life. Alexandria, I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Kristen. I met Kristen in person a couple of years ago at a fantastic mentoring one-on-one, and I highly recommend her for mentoring conversations. So I have been a big fan of the California Labor Lab for years, and I was so thrilled to be invited to speak to you today. My talk for today, Art Mimics Life When Gig Work Realities Hit the Silver Screen, ties in with the lab's 2025 annual conference on the arts and employment, both what it's like to work in the arts and what the arts have to say about work. And my talk today is going to be a little different from other talks that I've given that just focus on my own research. Today, I'll be talking about the 2025 movie Good Fortune and how it provides a surprisingly accurate depiction of gig work and the lived experience of gig workers. I'll be drawing on hundreds of interviews with gig workers conducted over more than a decade, which makes me feel ancient, as I highlight what the comedy gets right and wrong about the challenges of gig work. And then I'll wrap up with some insights into how media depictions can raise awareness of alternative employment arrangements and suggestions on how to reduce the health and economic impacts of gig work on workers and communities. Now, of course, I need some acknowledgments. This research is based on work supported by the NSF under 2 separate grants. Any opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this material are mine and not necessarily the views of the NSF. This work has also benefited from funding from the Russell Sage Foundation and the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. Ken Kai Kowalski and Erica Janko contributed to data collection during the COVID era interviews. Don Colton and Savannah Newton also assisted with coding. And our current research team includes Yu Zhang, Natalia Fuentes-Rohr, and Liz Ortel. And to start off, a brief synopsis of the movie. Good Fortune is a 2025 American comedy film written and directed by Aziz Ansari. It was his feature directorial debut. You can see from the movie poster here that the movie stars Seth Rogen, Ansari, Keke Palmer, Sandra Oh, and Keanu Reeves. Good Fortune follows an angel named Gabriel, played by Keanu Reeves, who fails to show Arj, played by Ansari, a struggling man, that money does not solve one's problems, although it certainly seems to. He does this by swapping the lives of Arj, the gig worker, with his wealthy tech bro employer, Jeff, played by Seth Rogen. And this body swap, of course, results in Gabriel losing his wings and being punished with life as a human, while the work he did as an angel begins to unravel around them. And my research for comparison comes from these thousands of hours of interviews that started in 2016 with hundreds of gig workers, and that, as Kristen mentioned, informed two finished books, an in contract, almost finished manuscript. If my editor is listening, I promise it's almost done. And what I like to think of as my fall goal, potentially another book. Um, in particular, Side Hustle Safety Net is a panel study of 199 gig workers, low-wage W-2 workers, and creative freelancers that we followed for 18 months. Then we followed up with about 80 of those workers, just gig workers and low-wage W-2, for 5 years. And that is what will become Trapped: Gig Work's Hidden Grip on the American Worker. I'm also today going to be drawing on Hustle and Gig, which was published in 2019 and involves interviews with nearly 80 gig workers for TaskRabbit, Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, and Kitchen Surfing, which is a now defunct platform that was best described as sort of a rent-a-chef platform. And then I'm still working on my $1,000 a day interviews, which is based on interviews with 50 elite gig workers. These are gig workers who have a $1,000 a day minimum wage, doing things like management consulting and marketing plans. And I'm happy to talk about any of these books or the research in the Q&A. You'll see these book covers also sprinkled throughout this presentation as a form of sort of visual citation. So if you're interested in learning more about any of the different topics, the book that's pictured is the one that's going to cover it. I should also mention that any of the respondents that are quoted in this presentation, their names are pseudonyms. Now, it's not entirely arrogant to highlight the gig economy accuracies in the movie and how it compares to my research. As part of his work on the movie, as he was writing the script, Aziz reached out to a number of gig economy researchers to consult on the movie, including yours truly, along with one of my mentors, Juliet Shore and Vina Dubal. And you can see all of us listed here in the movie credits. And I may have thanked my mom for giving me a name that started with the letter A. Now, we often tell people you can't believe everything you see on TV or read online, but maybe you can believe what you see on the silver screen, because there are 5 main themes that are shown in this movie that are incredibly accurate depictions of gig work. Those 5 things include the stigma against gig workers, the impact of cancellations, homelessness, the risks of financial costs to gig work, and finally, polyemployment. And throughout this talk, I'll be featuring screenshots of the film, although I will do my best to try and avoid any spoilers. In one of the opening scenes of Good Fortune, Aziz's character Arj is asked by a child why he's a laundryman. Arj clarifies he's not a laundryman, he's doing task sergeant. Did he go to college? The kid asks. Arj says he went to college. And the child, still trying to make sense of the gig worker in front of him, asks, did you not do good in college? Arj tells the kid that his dreams of being an archaeologist are likely to pan out about as well as his own documentary editing work because, well, how often have you ever met an archaeologist? He may have a point, but the child's parents leave a negative review because Arj has caused angst to a little kid. And this is a funny exchange, but it really does get at the stigma the gig workers often experience. And this stigma against gig workers is well documented. Irving Goffman defines stigma as a process by which the reaction of others spoils normal identity. Although stigma is more commonly thought of as affiliated with overt or external deformations, such as scars, disabilities, or medical conditions such as leprosy, stigma can also arise from deviations in personal traits such as unemployment, welfare dependency, or teenage parenthood. Stigmatized individuals often feel different and devalued by others, and many experience psychological distress. Richard, a middle-aged white male TaskRabbit, once opened up an interview with me by telling me that his girlfriend of 2 years had broken up with him owing to embarrassment over his TaskRabbit work. Rebecca, a 34-year-old TaskRabbit with an advanced degree and a side job as an adjunct instructor at a local college, admitted that she often lied to her mother and friends about her work, telling them she was temping in an office, not tasking in people's homes. And the embarrassment wasn't limited to TaskRabbit workers either. Even though I assured participants that their identities would be hidden, one Uber driver emailed me after an interview to reiterate the importance of not mentioning him by name. His quote is displayed here. He explained, Uber for me is like a feeling like when you get really drunk and regret what you did last night. That's exactly it. I don't want it to be associated as an Uber driver at any point in my life. I really don't want it to come up when people search my name on Google. Another driver, who had previously worked as a professional gambler, said that his embarrassed wife told him not to tell people that he drove for Uber. Being a gambler was considered more socially acceptable in her eyes. The second theme that is accurate is that of cancellations. In another early scene, Arj waits for hours outside the newest hot trend in LA, a store that sells buns. I don't know what types of buns these are. I picture them as like hot cross buns. But of course, the shop runs out of buns. And Arj, shown here, tells the client that they won't get charged for the buns, but please don't cancel the task. They cancel the task, he won't get paid. And of course, what does the client do? He cancels the task. Here too, we see that the movie is true to life. The job of line waiter is relatively new. Gig apps have made it possible for wealthier people to easily access low-income workers to take on undesirable tasks like line waiting or errand running or IKEA assembly. And having a task canceled or not getting paid also happens. The platforms will argue that they are an improvement over Craigslist. But the workers I've interviewed have also told me about having tasks canceled by clients with little notice, or even having tasks canceled by the platforms when there's a possibility of fraud. For instance, one English PhD, the author of a best-selling book, who was doing TaskRabbit, told me of being sent on a food pickup task that quickly spiraled from picking up a few drinks and sandwiches into picking up more than $200 worth of food. This task was promptly canceled by TaskRabbit as potential credit card fraud. And these cancellations that cause financial disruption are not limited to low-wage workers either. Elite gig workers also experience last-minute cancellations, and in some ways, their cancellations end up becoming even more problematic. Kathy, a 62-year-old independent HR consultant and organizational development specialist who did coachings and trainings, was hired to be a gig worker for a consultant who had a contract with a company. So several levels removed. And when the original client, canceled the training, all of a sudden, Kathy was out the money she had spent for her flights, in addition to being out the money that she expected to earn. So she was able to get the fees from the airlines to be reimbursed, but then she'd still lost 4 to 5 days of training that she was preparing to deliver. And she says, what can you do? You go and find other work. I mean, now I've got free days, so I have to go find another thing to fill those days. It's aggravating, but you want to be resilient. But it is generally very difficult to find 5 days worth of work, especially at the rates that these elite gig workers are being paid. And then sometimes workers are told that they have the choice to cancel. One of the challenges with gig work is that workers often don't know what's going to be involved. Arj's character didn't know that he was going to be staying there for hours just to run out of buns. And Jamal, a TaskRabbit that I interviewed in Hustle and Gig, didn't know when he was asked to clean out a pond in Brooklyn what exactly was going to be involved. He showed up to clean the pond. It turned out that the homeowner did not have any tools to clean out the pond. They didn't have any waders. They didn't have any mops. And so he had to roll up his jeans, take off his shoes and socks, and just get in and do it. And he says, I still have nightmares about that. And you can see this picture is actually a picture that Jamal took of his feet after the task. Oftentimes platforms tell workers that if they feel unsafe or like they can't do a task, that it's okay to cancel it. But that misses the opportunity cost of the money that the workers thought they were going to be able to make. For Jamal, he had commuted more than an hour out into Brooklyn. He had reserved the entire day to make this money. And when he found himself in that situation, he felt like he had no choice but to continue to do it. We also have a third theme here of homelessness. In this screen grab, we see Arj is living in his car. He's actually on the phone with his dad at the time, who is raving about a cousin who is so successful and smart and well dressed. And in this following scene, we later see the angel, previous angel, Gabriel, sleeping in a one-bed motel room with the former tech bro Jeff, played by Seth Rogen. This is when Jeff is living as a gig worker. And this is, of course, painted as a step up from sleeping in the car. At least both men could get completely horizontal. They have a bed. And in fact, staying in the hotel room is something they're only able to do when they're able to get enough money from doing gig work during the day. Now, this challenge of homelessness is something that we also see in interviews with workers. Brandy, a 20-something DoorDasher Uber Eats delivery worker, had previously had a job working for a telecom company making six figures. She ended up turning to gig work because she had some health challenges that made it difficult for her to be in a full-time job. And then because of that, she has just sort of moved around from precarious housing into precarious housing. She, at various points, has lived out of her car. She's lived with her boyfriend's mother, which went as well as you would expect. And now she and her boyfriend are living out of Airbnbs. They're unable to get enough money together in order to have the deposit on an apartment. And so she has organized her car in a way to allow her to live in these Airbnbs. She puts her possessions in Tupperwares and she carries the same things in and out to every single Airbnb. She has 4 bags and a box that she usually brings in. She often relies on laundry baskets because they are really, really helpful, as she says, and she can just put them right in her car. But because of the gig work that she's doing and because she has to pay every day for her Airbnb, she is essentially living day to day. She spends about $20 a day, and this is pre-inflation now, pre-war in Iran. She spends about $20 a day on gas, $10 for a pack of cigarettes or something for hygiene, and then maybe something from Taco Bell. And otherwise, she puts it 100% of what she's able to do, and it's not enough. And it's getting tighter and tighter with inflation. And she's not the only gig worker that we've interviewed who was homeless. Just like multiple characters in Good Fortune, Arj and then Jeff and Gabriel, we see in the research that multiple gig workers are living in their cars and in questionable situations. Amy was a creative freelancer. She was a dancer, singer, dance teacher with gigs as a prime shopper, picker, and essential worker. When the pandemic started, she was actually living in her car with a broken foot, something she describes as being semi-homeless because she did have a roof and windows. Andre, a 28-year-old shadow gig platform worker, and I'm happy to talk more in the Q&A about what those are. He actually started living in his car because his family's home was too crowded with a bunch of little kids and strict policies about COVID. And so this has actually impacted even how he feeds himself. He fills up the trunk of his car with random things that he could use to get energy if he needs it, or something quick to put together, like peanut butter, bagels, and bread. He also keeps a bunch of protein bars in his car in case he's really hungry. And for hot food, for hot meals, he relies on pizza or fast food. Now, the fourth theme is that of the financial cost to gig work. And just like we've seen homelessness come up regularly among gig workers, we've also seen the issue of vehicles being towed for tickets, tolls, and other fees. In this scene, Seth Rogen's character, Jeff, has his car towed by the police for unpaid parking tickets. And he says, "Explain to me how I get my car back." And in the next scene, the police officer explains that each day your car stays in there, in the impound lot, the impound fee goes up. To which Jeff, of course, responds, "Great system. Thank you." Now, this issue of cars being impounded has come up routinely. Lacey, a 35-year-old former dollar store worker, became a DoorDash driver during the pandemic. She believed that this was going to be her best way to be able to make money, and also to be able to keep her youngest daughter with her without having to pay for childcare. She was doing as much hustling as she could, driving around doing as many deliveries as she could. She gets home late one day and she parks her car in front of a fire hydrant. Definitely not a good idea. Not going to say that that is a wise parking location by any means. And of course, her car gets rightfully ticketed. But then the next week, she also parked in a zone where she wasn't supposed to park. And she had forgotten about those things because she had so many other things going on. She also had a number of tolls that were unpaid because she had told DoorDash that she wanted to only do deliveries that didn't involve tolls in New York. And she was still sent across bridges and through the tunnels that incurred tolls. And so she goes down because she's forgotten about the ticket. She goes down to her car and she sees what she describes as this big old fat thing wrapped around the wheel of the car. Her car's been booted. And there's a big sticker on the window telling her how to get rid of the boot. But she doesn't have any money to pay these tickets and to pay these tolls. And so soon afterwards, she goes down to empty stuff out of the car and the vehicle is gone. And the next thing she knows, a couple weeks later, she gets a decline charge on one of her credit cards from Easy Pass. So even as her car is being impounded and likely sold at auction or for parts, she's still getting hit with tolls as the car travels across one of the bridges. As she says, that was the last time I heard from my vehicle. And then there are some workers that get hit with multiple things at the same time. Andre, who I'd mentioned earlier, was eating food that he could store in his car easily. Andre was fast asleep in his vehicle when he gets woken up by a flashlight and a police officer. And the officer wants to know what it is that what he's doing. And as Andre puts it, if you look at the car, it's obvious that I'm sleeping in the car. The officer tells him to get out of the car. He runs his name and information, and he discovers that he has unpaid parking tickets in another county. He had also previously had a registration that had lapsed because he doesn't have an address that he can use very readily. And so he has a warrant out for his arrest due to these tickets. He gets transferred over to another county where then he essentially goes through the entire intake procedure for that county jail. He gets fingerprinted, he gets the TB shot. They actually want him to stay for an entire week, all over $75 worth of bail. And it ended up being that he had about $2,000 worth of tickets and impound expenses. And this definitely seems like incredibly irresponsible behavior. But in New York and in New Jersey, which is where this happens, any ticket that is not paid within 30 days immediately starts to increase and eventually will start actually obtaining interest on top of that, which compounds at 9%. So this issue of sort of tickets ballooning out of control is a common situation for these respondents. Excuse me. And then we also have the issue of polyemployment. This is Gabriel, the former angel who has become a chain smoking and drinking restaurant worker who loves the taste of chicken nuggies and milkshakes. So you can see this is definitely a bit of a comedy, right? In this scene, Gabriel has just received his first paycheck. He is being paid as a W-2 worker because he's working for a restaurant, although that doesn't always happen like that. And he is staring at this paycheck with utter dismay. And he tells Felipe, there's something wrong with my paycheck. There's a whole bunch of money that's missing from it, money that has been paid out for taxes. And Felipe says, you may need to get another job. And Reeves's character, Gabriel, says, I wash dishes all the time. When can I do another job? And Felipe says, I don't know. I have 3 jobs. And you can see the look of shock on Gabriel's face. He says, what? And Felipe says, I work here. I'm a mechanic and I do valet parking at an escape room. This is polyemployment. This is working two or more jobs. Polyemployment can include a side hustle, but it can also include a side hustle that's accompanying one's full-time or main job. It can also include two or more part-time jobs. It can include multiple gigs, being on multiple platforms simultaneously. Polyemployment is often a response to underemployment, such as involuntary part-time work or unemployment itself. It can be a response to wage stagnation and inflation. So, as you can imagine, we are seeing polyemployment really increasing these days. And polyemployment can also sometimes be used to enable the pursuit of passion jobs like creative work. So sometimes we've seen people who have one job and then they really want to become an influencer. And so they're doing some influencer stuff on the side. Now, polyemployment is also part of the internalization of risk, where workers assume personal responsibility for the physical and financial market risks that are shifted on them from corporations in a risk society. As one worker explained it to us, they don't want to, quote, put all of their eggs in one basket. And so that's why they had three different income sources, including a full-time job, a side business, and then also doing food delivery. And in fact, some of the different examples that workers give us are incredibly varied. Ashley was 30 years old. She had three different consistent part-time jobs as a dancer, a dance teacher, and receptionist for a Pilates studio. Meanwhile, Curtis, who was 32 years old, was a 1099 worker for teaching jobs, got paid in cash and pot for delivery work, also did some work on music, and also was paid for, quote, random tech assistance stuff on film productions. Lucia, 22, did Instacart and Shipt mostly, but also did Uber Eats, DoorDash, and Postmates. And Diamond, a 27-year-old physical therapist, a doctor of physical therapy, described herself as a Craigslist queen for the number of gigs that she had picked up on Craigslist, in addition to doing Instacart. So you can see quite a slew of different ways that people have polyemployment. So now the question is, where are the inaccuracies? Because right now you're thinking, oh, I don't have to read Side Hustle Safety Net. I can just go watch the movie. Well, one obvious inaccuracy, at least as far as I personally know, is that we don't have specialized guardian angels to save our lives when we are texting and driving, as Gabriel the angel is doing in this movie still. Or as Gabriel the angel is also repeating with this gentleman. Apparently, we have quite a problem with texting and driving, which, to be fair, the movie also makes that point. Another potential inaccuracy is the deactivation that Jeff receives from the food company Foodzer. It says here, dear valued Foodzer associate, next week we are shifting to primarily robo delivery. Your rating does not meet our threshold. Your account is terminated immediately. It's very handy that they say view details. Now, it is very accurate that workers find themselves deactivated with no notice and no opportunity for redress or to appeal. In fact, we've seen various efforts in New York and I believe also in parts of California and Massachusetts to make it so that platforms have to allow people an opportunity to appeal. But whether that is successful or not remains to be seen. So it's accurate that workers might find themselves deactivated, but so far we do not yet have workers being told that they have been deactivated because they are being directly replaced by a driving robot or a delivery robot. In this image pictured here, of course, we have a delivery worker next to one of these famous delivery robots, which I understand are actually incredibly common at UNC Charlotte. So if they're all over college campuses. And I understand they're also in parts of San Francisco. I'm sure there'll be one near you soon, too. And we are certainly seeing efforts for workers to be replaced with self-driving vehicles and AI tools. As this slew of headlines from just the last 6 months shows, we have robot taxis, we have driverless semi-trucks. That sounds like it definitely isn't going to be a problem. And workers in Hollywood who used to write scripts and who are now secretly training AI for income. And in fact, we are seeing AI impacting creative workers and gig workers. Last month, Ken Kai Kowalski, a recent UNC grad and now assistant professor at Marquette, and I published this paper in Work and Occupations, looking at how creative freelancers are perceiving the risks of AI taking their jobs. And some people are worried about their jobs. Some people are pretty confident in their own jobs and only worried about other people's jobs. And some people are what we call the hired guns, who recognize that AI will result in job losses and who are taking on gigs to train AIs or market AI tools or be part of the raw materials used by AI tools simply because they are being offered money. These workers use language that harkens back to the Nuremberg trials. They talk about just following orders and not being to blame. In one particularly disturbing quote, a respondent compares himself to a construction worker laying the bricks for gas chambers in concentration camps and being warned about what's going to happen, but insisting that all he's doing is being paid to lay brick. And as work moves from the career to the job to the gig, and as new grads struggle to find work, we may find an increasing number of people engaging in this AI training work, making it possible for AI to jump ahead even faster than we had expected. Now, in my final two sections today, I want to briefly discuss how media depictions can raise awareness of alternative employment arrangements and suggestions on how to reduce the health and economic impacts of gig work on workers and their communities. Put another way, media matters. To begin with, bringing sociology and other disciplines to the silver screen provides a novel way to reach people where they are. A brief shout out here to my department, which organized a field trip to a local movie theater to see Good Fortune in person. My colleagues are brilliant and lovely, and I love them dearly. But I will tell you, we have yet to figure out a field trip that ties in with an academic article or a book, but we can definitely do a field trip when it comes to a movie, which I think is fantastic. People are much more willing to go and go see a movie and add some popcorn with it than they are to maybe I'll read another article. In all seriousness, though, the audience for a movie can just be bigger. Here's the Rotten Tomatoes entry for Good Fortune, where the movie has 150 reviews on the tomato meter and 1,000 verified ratings on the popcorn meter. It's also listed under comedy, fantasy, action, and drama. By comparison, here's the Goodreads listing for Hustle and Gig, which only has 107 ratings and has been out since 2019. And my book falls under the categories of nonfiction, sociology, technology, labor, and economics. So, a summertime beach read. Even looking on Google, you can find 407 million search results when you look up the term Good Fortune movie, and only 220 million for the broad search term gig work. Movies simply get more attention. If there is, I will freely admit that when Aziz first reached out, I was a little like, I don't know about this, but I would highly recommend if there's any possibility to have your work show up on a bigger screen. It seems to have a bigger impact. But I also promised to talk about how to reduce the negative impacts of gig work. Because as this scene from the movie reminds us, as Rogan's character Jeff is talking to Gabriel. This is right after the car has been towed. He says, "This is too hard, man." And he's right. Gig work, the situation that workers are going through right now, is simply too hard. We owe it to them and to ourselves to come up with solutions. For years, I've argued that gig work is somehow different from other work. It's not just informal work, it's more insidious. One of the criticisms of hustle and gig was that, of course, Uber drivers were struggling. Taxi drivers struggle, and we shouldn't expect anything different from a tech platform enabled taxi. And like all good academics, a significant portion of my research questions are driven by a slight disagreement with reviewer two. See, in my newest book, Trapped, which will be out next year, I'm following 80 gig workers and low-wage W-2 workers for 5 years. And in this new book, I systematically outline what sets gig work apart from other low-wage work. I show exactly what the long-term implications of this work can be, and I note that while the gigs themselves are short, the impacts of gig work can be long-lasting. In particular, I outline how workers get stuck in gig work for years due to the four horsemen of the gig apocalypse: the gilded bait, the deferred ledger, the hand-to-mouth survival, and finally, civic death. I explain that platforms market themselves as offering fast and easy money, free from bosses and limits, and use that gilded bait to ensnare workers. Many of you who are on this call today have flexibility in your workplaces, but for many gig workers who have spent a good deal of time in low-wage job or in shift work, it is very difficult for them to have that same level of flexibility. And I find that workers soon discover that gig work is simply borrowing from their future selves. Gig work creates a deferred ledger of tolls, taxes, fees, and fines. Before long, gig work simply becomes hand-to-mouth survival, a holding pattern that provides just enough cash to prevent total collapse, but never enough to build a foundation for escape. During the pandemic, when people were receiving CARES Act money, that was, for some workers, the first opportunity to escape. The exhaustion that comes from gig work is a feature. It is not an unintended flaw. And then finally, civic death occurs when gig workers' resulting poverty is criminalized, like we saw with Andre, and turned into a permanent mark against them legally, financially, and socially. And that's another difference between the gig work reality and the silver screen depiction. In the research realm, I have to focus on what's going on and the future implications. And not to provide too much of a spoiler, but Good Fortune ends on an optimistic, if highly fictional note. So what can we do to create change? Getting back to the solutions. First, we can remove the gilded bait that gig work relies on in order to encourage workers to join. There should be truth in advertising requirements for marketing materials for Uber and Lyft and TaskRabbit and the shadow gig platforms. Movies like Good Fortune help to show the exploitative underbelly of gig work. We need more things like that that really show people what's going on. Because the movie is marketed as a comedy, people don't always realize that there's a lot of accuracy. We also need to clarify the accounting of the deferred ledger. Workers should receive upfront information from platforms about the expected mileage for doing a delivery or a pickup, the expected payment, let people know if is this person likely to tip or not, and what the expected time obligation is. Excuse me, if you are picking up from a restaurant that regularly takes 45 minutes in order to prepare a meal, someone should give you a heads up about that. And then we should also reduce the hand-to-mouth survival and civic death that comes with gig work. We could implement corporate management trainee programs that help workers to break out of long-term work. Many gig economy companies require their management staff to do a delivery a quarter in order to remain familiar with how the platform works. Why not take advantage of the expertise of these gig workers? GE and McDonald's used to promote from within. Their store managers were former line workers. Why not have gig platforms hire their workers into similar management trainee programs? Think about the wealth of expertise they could offer about gig work challenges or how to encourage positive interactions between workers and customers. There could also be negotiated discounts for drivers on gas or electric cars, not like the Uber rental program of about 5 to 10 years ago, where Uber was making money off of the rentals, but something that actually helps workers to break even a little bit more on their finances. But even changes with the companies are not enough. We also need policy changes and more regulation. Companies should be required to report the number of W-2 and 1099 workers they have on their payroll. And they should be required to provide justification before making a worker a 1099 worker. Right now, companies just get to decide. And unless workers sue over misclassification or the IRS gets involved, the companies generally just get away with this. I personally, at one point in my life, was misclassified as a 1099 worker when I was an adjunct instructor for a college in the East Coast. Companies should not be allowed to have the majority of their workforce be 1099 workers. In fact, I would argue that if the majority of your workers are classified as 1099, that would suggest that what they are actually doing is the real purpose of your company. It's hard to say that they're just supplementary if they make up the majority of the workers. We should also reduce the financial benefits of misclassification. Right now, estimates are that it saves a company anywhere from 20 to 40% of the cost of a worker to classify them as an independent contractor or 1099 worker instead of a W-2 worker. If we closed that gap, if we required contributions to portable benefits like health savings accounts, unemployment insurance, and 401ks, that would make workers better off and it would reduce some of the financial benefits of misclassifying workers. We should also require companies to make contributions to Social Security and Medicare. If you can cut a check to a worker or do an electronic transfer to them, then you can cut a check to Social Security for 6.2% of the earnings earned by that worker. Not deducting it from the worker's pay, but that company actually making a contribution in their name, like happens with W-2 employers. Also, any company with more than a certain percentage of 1099 workers should be taxed and required to contribute to social safety nets accordingly. Years ago, we got very upset when Walmart and McDonald's were counseling their workers to get food stamps and how to apply for government benefits. And yet today, we let tech companies outsource healthcare for their workers to Medicaid because they're not providing health insurance to these workers. And these are the ones that are sort of best off that they're able to get health insurance coverage through Medicaid. Now, I've promised no spoilers, but I've hinted that good fortune ends on a high note. Seriously, I get no royalties, but I would highly recommend that you see the movie. Gig work doesn't have to be bad. It can be improved. It can be created to help workers, not hurt them. But it requires realizing that the only reason we are not gig workers is our own good fortune. And with that, I'm right on time. I'd like to open it up for questions.
Thank you so much. That was fabulous. I have a number of questions myself, but we have a question that popped up in the chat in the early portion of your talk when you were discussing the pond cleaning and some of the other issues. Bob M. asked, it seems some of these issues could be resolved with a proper contract or pre-questioning. I get paid for my time waiting in line, regardless of whether or not the item I'm waiting for is available when I get to the front of the line. Or, client shall provide all pond cleaning tools and equipment. If tools and equipment are not provided, worker may decline to do the work and shall be paid a certain amount for time and travel expenses. And so then Bob asks, what can be done to create a clearer set of expectations? And you got to this a bit at the end, but I wonder if you could share some more reflections.
Yeah, that's a good question, Bob. I feel like you might be a lawyer. And I mean that in the kindest way. One of the reasons why this happens is that the platforms try to reduce any type of barrier to the client putting the task on here, right? So you just ask the bare minimum of questions and you expect the bare minimum from that client. So there should be, they did that in the beginning. Now people know what these things are. They don't have to engage in quite so much sort of marketing. Now there should be, yeah, a requirement. Like, this might be one of those few things where AI could actually be used for good, because it could be that you type in clean pond and maybe the AI chatbot jumps in and says, hey, that's actually something that can be kind of dangerous. So, what do you have in terms of protective equipment? And if you want somebody to bring it, well, how deep is this pond and how big is it? And what do you think might be in the pond? And so that type of thing could be implemented by these platforms. I think that it absolutely should be. I think that workers should also be told, look, if you show up and it's not what you think it is, we're not just going to give you an hour of pay. We will pay you for the entire thing. Like, take a picture of it, show us what it is that you're dealing with, and then we've got you. Those two things would certainly help. Do I think that's going to happen? Not unless we get a little bit more regulation, or the companies simply get sort of shamed into doing this.
Thank you. We've got a few more questions coming in. Rishi Chopra asks, why no public policy prescriptions? None of these problems could come to have existed without implicit sanction. What about UBI, universal health care, and those sort of policy solutions?
I mean, I am all for UBI, which I always tell people I'm very surprised to discover that I'm all for UBI. I grew up in a very conservative, very Republican household with Rush Limbaugh on the radio. My dad was a member of the Tea Party. And then the pandemic hit, and I saw how much it changed people's lives to have care money coming in on a weekly basis, which is kind of the closest we've ever had to UBI. And I was like, oh my God, this is a game changer. So yes, I don't have it covered here as a policy change, but I think we should Swedenize. We should UBI, we should health insurance for everyone, and free education. And oh yes, sign me. I live in New York City. Adami's my mayor. Sign me up. Um, do I think that's going to happen right now? Not in the next 2 years. Um, but yes, we probably need a next in a month. You guys have the Future of Work people with Christina Banks coming in. I was part of those conversations, and I think that Christina is going to have a lot of things to be said about all the changes that need to happen to make work better for everyone.
Great, thank you. Next up, Megan Melville asks, can you recommend a free website where you can check to see what your salary or hourly pay should be compared to current economy and state? For example, a part-time office manager.
Wow, that is a different question. So in some states, they have actually made it the law that job ads have to include salary information. So I would go and check out job ads for locations in those states. New York, I know, makes this part of the law. Employers try to get around it. You'll see that some employers will be like, oh, the pay for this ranges from $1 to $400,000 a year. I view that as them also telling you that they're jerks and you don't want to work for them. But I would go and check that out. A lot of organizations, like professional organizations, will also do reports like this. When I worked in nonprofits, the Professionals for Nonprofits and the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and I think sometimes the Chronicle of Higher Ed, would actually also provide this type of information. And then don't quote me on this, but I think the federal government still collects some information about salary ranges by occupational codes. And Kristen, I see you shaking.
I
Is
think
it
that's, yep. I think we, yeah,
T-top?
I was just accessing that information. I also noticed that Michelle had a response to the question.
Oh,
And Michelle, I don't know if you want to chime in.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was just clearing them for you.
Oh, okay.
oh,
All right. Well, that was very thorough. Thank you, Alexandria. Next up, Tyler Cohern asks, you describe social isolation and uncertainty felt by gig workers. Is there a public social cost, in your opinion, of so much widespread precarity and uncertainty?
yes, absolutely. Standing out of the UK actually writes about this rise of the precariat and how you lose this sense of community. Um, one of the things that I actually have an entire chapter on in this new book, Trapped, is how this impacts people's dating lives. So people feel like, oh, I don't have a good job. I don't bring anything to a relationship. And so we actually see, especially young men, being like, oh, I'm not going to be in a relationship because I don't have anything to give. I don't have a stable job. I don't have an occupation. And that can impact, for future family relationship building, connections with other people. I think, I don't know if any of you have ever been unemployed or low income at various points. I've been on unemployment 3 times in my life. This is why I became an academic. And when you don't have a lot of money, a lot of times the activities, especially that we've seen the loss of third places, a lot of activities require money. And so we see that people sort of shut down in terms of their social interactions because they're embarrassed they can't afford things. So I think we lose out on a lot. And I think even when we do have people working and they're hustling constantly and trying to, side hustle this and multiple jobs and polyemployment, that every minute you spend working is a minute that you're not spending with family. It's a minute you're not spending contributing to your community. It's a minute you're not spending at a religious institution or volunteering. And what is the collective cost of all that to us as just a people? I mean, that's huge. You can't even spend that time reading books. Um, and so often we actually have talked to workers who are like, oh, I thought I could watch like a TV show, but then I was like, oh, but that's 23 minutes and I could do a walk on Rover for that 23 minutes. Like everything starts to be thought of in terms of money. We lose humanity. Then we just have AI take us out. Yes,
Okay,
the
well,
public libraries are still free. Yes,
yeah,
thankfully.
there are a lot of questions that people are
Oh,
curious about, and so just to
I'll
manage
try to be faster.
remaining time, we've got maybe four-ish more topics. So next up, someone asks, is this just the grass being trampled by the state and corporate elephants? That is, in their respective efforts to avoid accountability and responsibility.
Wow. Okay. The workers are just being, I'm a little lost.
Well, I think that the gigification, the 1099, everything you've just described about the precarious conditions, does this serve the interests of state and corporate elites? And
Oh, yes,
is that the
absolutely. I
simple
mean,
story?
this is reserve labor force, oh, hey, yeah. It used to be like, well, if you don't do what I want you to do, I'll outsource your job to another country. Oh, if you don't do what I want you to do, I'm outsourcing your job to the literally the person on their phone outside the front door. Yes, this is absolutely, this is, this is the epitome of inequality being brought to a workplace near you. Yeah.
Then a couple of people were curious about 1099 workers. So Alan Williams asks, any data on how many 1099 workers there are and what proportion of the workforce they represent?
Ellen, you are asking the question that everyone has been asking me this past week. You are one of literally 5 people who have asked me that exact same question, including reporters and consulting people. We do not have any good numbers on this. And we do not have any good numbers on this for a number of reasons. One is that previously 1099s were not required by all gig platforms. In fact, even now, some gig platforms say, well, I don't need to give one because I pay through some type of payment system. Two, even when 1099s are reported, people don't always mention them on their taxes. We also see that even when people are told that they're 1099, sometimes they'll describe themselves in interviews with researchers as working for a company. And it's only later on, in fact, Abrams did work on this. It's only after questioning that people will be like, oh, no, I get paid as a 1099 worker. There are some possible ways to get some of this information. So Cornell's ILR school has a page full of statistics, and they actually link to things like the contingent worker survey and some census data. So there's that possibility. You can also look at some work that's been done even by banks, looking at the number of deposits that are from certain companies that would suggest 1099 work. But a lot of these workers are not even banked in a traditional way. You know, they might actually be having their payments being put on a cash card. And so we do know that it seems to be growing, but how big, we don't know.
Okay, and then one related question on 1099s was a curiosity of outside of tech or gig work. Are there certain industries in which there's a lot of reliance on 1099 workers?
Media. Media is one of the biggest offenders. And, you know, we think about freelance reporters. I remember when AB5 was being passed in January 2020, I gave a news interview in person, the last one I gave in person at CBS. And they were like, oh, what other industries? They asked that exact same question. I'm like, oh, tech, delivery. And they're like, what about us? What are you talking about? I said, look around this newsroom on January 1, 2020. Every single person who's here, the producer, the camera person, the makeup person, we are all 1099 workers. I've met an academic who told me that his son worked for a major publication, had been working there for 10 years, and was still a 1099 worker. There's a reason why California was trying to do AB5, right? We've actually even seen that some doctors are paid as 1099 workers because various hospital, I guess Kaiser, couldn't hire doctors directly. And in fact, we're seeing small businesses now are turning to 1099 workers. I'm working on this, but my acupuncturist pays her receptionist as a 1099 worker. And I'm like, you can't do that. Yeah. But it's a cost savings and money talks.
So we are nearly at time. So I'm going to quickly highlight the remaining questions and then perhaps you can give us a quick final word. But somebody is somewhat alarmed and asks, how can, the quote from the physical therapist was alarming. Is there any advice for how a given individual could escape gig work? Education doesn't seem to be a cure-all. Somebody else Justine asks, how can gig workers be best reached for education about workplace hazards? Is there any way to disseminate to these workers? And then finally, Jeff Loy asks, how can we all be movie stars? Can you tell us more about channels for academics to disseminate in forums beyond journals, such as film?
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm not a movie star. So number one, how can workers escape this type of work? It seems like there is sort of a window to escape, right? If you only pick up a gig once in a while off of TaskRabbit, you're going to be in a much better position than somebody who turns to it full time. It seems to be that once somebody does gig work for about 6 months, if that is their main source of income, that it becomes very difficult for them to break out. So the number one thing is if you turn to doing any type of gig work, know what your exit plan is. Don't fall into the like, oh, this is temporary, I'm going to do this, because time is going to fly and you are going to get stuck. The best way to reach these workers, that is a great question. I think you have to reach them online. You know, a lot of times they are on their phones while they are waiting for another ping to come through. And so you need to go on things like Reddit, you need to go on things like Insta, go on these social media forums. I would also go to where we know that these workers are going to be congregating. So here in New York City, you go to the local parks that are centrally located, and there will be hundreds of gig workers sitting there. They're talking to each other, you know, because they've got their courier bikes. Go and talk to them where they are. I would also say, you know, go to the airport. They're going to be waiting in line there. Go to places where there's free bathrooms, outside McDonald's, that type of thing. And then how do we engage more? We have to be willing to take chances. We have to be willing to write stuff that is interesting. So many academics are so brilliant and so hard to read. And so I think we need to really support people in writing op-eds, in writing popular press, in engaging in people outside of the ivory tower, engaging with the gig workers union and testifying and doing things to help raise visibility about what's going on. Because we are, even if you work for a private university, we are public employees. We have an obligation to give back. And I get goosebumps as I say that. But it's our job to make our research reachable. And hopefully we can do it. And hopefully the movie people will come and find us.
With that, I thank you so much. And I think we had a huge audience. Thank you to everybody for attending. We could talk with you much, much longer, but we know you have other things you have to move on to. Yeah, this was fabulous. And I encourage everybody to check out your wonderful written work. Although the movie is enjoyable, the books are too. Very, very readable.
Thank you, Kristen. Well, thank you so much. This was super fun and really great questions. And now I feel like I need to go back and make some more tweaks and edits.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.